TorahCafe.com.
So tonight we're going to be talking about a fascinating topic, the topic of the resurrection of the dead, which will take place once Mashiach comes. We'll discuss the details of it as the night continues. This is in continuation of our topic last week, which was getting a crash course in what life will be like when Mashiach comes. And some of the things that we discussed last week were also some of the prelude, what's going to happen, what's going to take place before Mashiach comes, signs of the times, and how do we know when we're ready, how to get ready, and those are some of the things that we discussed last week. So I wanted to spend just a few minutes, especially for those who were not here last week, just kind of outlining some of the things that we discussed, giving like an abridged version, crash course of the crash course from last week. And those who were here last week, it'll be just a good review to get us in the mood. So we'll continue addressing that topic, and then we will move on to the topic of Tchias HaMesim, the resurrection of the dead. Okay, so last week we talked about the coming of Mashiach as the culmination of everything that the world was created for. We discussed it as being the Rambam's 12th of the 13 principles of faith, one of the defining pillars, one of the defining marks of what it means to be a Jew is to believe and anticipate Mashiach's coming, to await his coming every day. We discussed last week what the concept of Mashiach is, that he's a human born of natural parents, natural causes, not a quasi-deity as he is seen in some other faiths. He's a human born of human parents, descendant of King David, a very learned Torah scholar who is able to inspire and galvanize the Jewish people back to their roots and instill Torah values and mitzvahs within the Jewish people at large. He will fight the wars of God, and eventually that through his hand will come the rebuilding of the temple, the ingathering of the exiles, and world peace. Big stuff, great stuff, all stuff that we touched on last week. That's his role. That's what he's going to do. We discussed last week why certain people in our history who aspired to be Mashiach were not Mashiach, and no need to rehash that. You can, the class was recorded last week. You can, look at the details that we discussed then. The other thing that we discussed about were some of the signs of the time. We mentioned a whole slew of sort of negative signs that were meant to come, that would be sort of a heads up of what's coming. We discussed some of the things that are discussed in the Talmud, about how large segments of world Jewry scorning their tradition, and how the government turns to a place of godlessness, how academies turn to places of immorality, where the pious are degraded and denigrated, how insolence will increase, all things that we are very much familiar with, unfortunately. But then we said on the other side of the coin that there's a lot of good things that are taking place as well. One of the concepts that we also started talking about last week and that we're going to pick up on this week is how all of creation, all of our history, our collective history, is meant to be, as the Talmud describes, from Adam 6,000 years, right? And we said that parallels the first 6 days, just like God created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh. The seventh day was Shabbos, was a day of rest, of eternal of rest. That in parallel to that, you have a world that will exist for 6,000 years, right? 6,000 years of us working and pursuing. And the seventh millennium, beginning at the year 6,000 at latest, where we usher in the Shabbos, the time period that is eternal peace and eternal Shabbos. We mentioned that each day in the creation process, right? We open up your copy of the Torah. The first day is a certain creation. The second day, another thing. And each day, as the days go forth, parallels something taking place in our collective world history. Meaning the first 1,000 years, the circumstances that took place in the first 1,000 years of our history parallel the first day of creation, what was created and what was going on. And the second 1,000 years of history parallels the second day, what was going on, what was created. And we discussed that in detail last week, how each part of the creation process of the first 6 days parallels part of our 6,000-year collective history, culminating with Mashiach, ultimately at the latest in the year 6,000. Okay? We discussed last week as well that we on the Jewish calendar right now are at 5775. Okay, so 5775 out of 6,000. So on the cosmic clock, we were examining and kind of looking at the idea that we're holding Friday afternoon. If you look at the world as world history as sort of like a cosmic clock that every 1,000 years represents one day, then we're holding Friday afternoon. We're holding right before Shabbos. And we described last week a phenomenon that happens in a Shabbos observant household. We said that as the week progresses and we get to Friday afternoon, everything starts to speed up. At the beginning of the week, the idea of Shabbos and what's going to happen on Shabbos is sort of like theoretical. You start thinking, who should we invite? You discuss it. What should be on the menu? And then as the week continues, you make the calls and you say, we want to have you as a guest. And as the week progresses, things start to speed up. But if you go Friday afternoon to any Shabbos observant household, you'll see the house is flying. There's cleaning, there's people, showering, there's food cooking, there's all sorts of hecticness and craziness. There's a joke, that it's not even really a joke. It's like sort of like an irony that no matter what time Shabbos starts, it's always a rush. This time of year, it's the winter, so Shabbos starts very early, so it's always a rush. But even in the summertime, when Shabbos starts much later, in Florida it can be close to 8 p.m., it's still a rush. I don't know how that works. Like defies the laws of physics, right? When Shabbos starts 5 o'clock, we manage to get everything ready, and it's a rush. But it's understandably a rush because, you got to leave work early and figure everything out, and I can understand. But even when it's 8 o'clock, it's still a rush. It's just indicative of Friday afternoon is rush. Could be part of it. So, as a collective people, as we near the year 6,000, as we near the latest point when Shabbos must arrive, when Mashiach must come, it's Friday afternoon on the cosmic clock, things start to speed up. And we mentioned last week the prophecy of the Zohar, which states that just like in the 600th year of Noah's life, a flood came to the world, and the waters came from above and the waters came from below. So too, says the Zohar, in the 600th year of the 6th millennium, which is the year 5600 in the Jewish calendar, on the secular calendar 1840, beginning in that time, around that era, there's going to be a flood. But not a flood of water, a flood of knowledge. And the waters will come from the waters above and the waters below. The waters above meaning Torah, and the waters below meaning scientific discovery and technological advancement. And we see that just like a flood begins with a little trickle and then becomes this tsunami, so too, throughout history, and we elaborated on some of those points, there's been sort of a trickle of how let's say, how Torah knowledge was spread, and then eventually to the point of a flood, after the printing press was invented, and then later on, as communications, beginning in the early 1800s, when communications became more enhanced, and as the 1800s progressed and we moved to the 1900s, when communications started getting more advanced, Torah was able to be spread much easier. Right now, you can access Torah anytime, anywhere. We just talked about that before the class started. And the same thing with technological discoveries. We discussed that how until the early 1800s, you could take anyone out from any point in history, and they really wouldn't, and place them in the 1800s. You take someone from the 5th century and place them in the 1800s, they really wouldn't experience that much of a culture shock. But if you took someone from 1900 and put them in 2000, or even 1950 and put them in 2000, there'd be a tremendous culture shock, because things are changing fast. Friday afternoon, everything speeds up. They say that, we were talking about the proliferation of knowledge, that a week's worth of New York Times, in a contemporary New York Times, has more information in it than a person in the 1800s would experience in their entire lifetime. Talk about information speeding up. So we said on the opposite end of the scale of all the negative things that sort of are the prequel to Mashiach's coming, we also have the good stuff. We also have light. We also have transformation. We said last week also, just to conclude about what we talked about last week, we said that the reason that we hear about the bad stuff is because bad stuff sells. Politicians can control us with negative information, with fear. The media can control us with negative information, with fear. Right? All talking about all the good stuff that happened in town. It's not going to sell. No one's going to watch. But a 24-hour news station, right, is much more effective if it tells its audience, your children could be in danger. Tune in at 7. Right? That sells much better and grabs your attention much more, this fear factor or this negativity, than something good happening. Right? Who's going to tune into that? They know that. So we tend to hear about only the negative. One of the other things that are discussed as history sort of winds down and we get ready to our period of eternal Shabbos, of Mashiach coming, is that things that took place in ancient times will begin to rehash themselves. Ancient battles will sort of rehash themselves and re-exist. Jewish sources speak about the Jewish people either earning Mashiach and him coming in a peaceful way, or a way of turmoil out of desperation, meaning we didn't earn it, so it comes in a way of turmoil. There are sources that discuss world recessions and governments controlled by despots. We have a tradition of a great war of Gog and Magog that will take place. There's different speculations in our Jewish literature as to the timing of that war, whether it's something that will take place before Mashiach comes or after Mashiach is already revealed. Some would like to say that it's already taken place, that we've already suffered enough and Mashiach's already ready to come. There is also the idea that Elijah the prophet will announce the redemption, that he's like the forerunner of Mashiach, and will announce that Mashiach's coming. There's other sources that say that he will be the heralder of Mashiach after Mashiach arrives. So as far as when and the exact placement of everything, certain things we'll just have to wait and see how it's going to play out, those exact details. But we have certain things that we know will take place. One of the things that's very interesting is that these days, in our modern times, in the last 100 years certainly, and with the invention of things like the internet and global communications, we really can experience the world as one global village. We are one global community, something that has never taken place in the history of mankind, where not only can a person travel anywhere on planet Earth in a matter of hours. But we can communicate with anyone on planet Earth at any time in a matter of seconds. And you can see them, right? That is a tremendous idea. And news is reported instantaneously. We know exactly what's taking place on the other side of the world. You just turn on your local news station. You can find out live, watch it live, see what's going on the other side of the world right at this very moment as it's happening. Something that really could not exist up until this point. So we said that part of the precursor to Mashiach coming is also that these ancient ideas and ancient classic battles show themselves once again. Isn't it interesting, especially since September 11th, that we see a war on terror against where the entire world is zeroed in on the cradle of civilization, where mankind originated from. That Middle East, that Fertile Crescent, Iraq, Iran, Persia, that ancient place, all the world's center of attention is on that area of the world where humankind started. Humankind really grew from. Many sources in our tradition actually speak of a global terror initiated by radical Ishmaelites. One of the things that's also interesting is that in our tradition, the Zohar speaks about villains and concepts and conflicts from the ancient past sort of rehashing themselves in a different time, in that end times, finishing themselves out, finishing out the war, the battle, the conflict that existed between those leaders or those nations and the Jewish people. I always thought it was interesting. A villain from Jewish history is Nebuchadnezzar II. He was a leader of ancient Iraq. His goal in life was to destroy Jews, to immortalize himself, and to destroy the Jewish homeland. That was his goal in life. Nebuchadnezzar, like I said, lived and ruled ancient Iraq. What's interesting is that Saddam Hussein considered himself sort of a reincarnation of Nebuchadnezzar. Like, actually viewed himself. And a lot of his life and ideologies were modeled after this wicked Jewish villain from our history. Saddam Hussein thought of himself as Nebuchadnezzar's reincarnation. Professor Eric Klein defined or viewed Saddam Hussein, referred to him as having Nebuchadnezzar imperial complex. So he referred to him. Saddam titled an Iraqi art festival with the title from Nebuchadnezzar to Saddam Hussein. Like, that was the title of the art festival in Iraq. He ordered that a replica of Nebuchadnezzar's chariot be built. In 1982, workers began reconstructing Nebuchadnezzar's original 600-room palace. He spent hundreds of billions of dollars, Saddam Hussein, hundreds of billions of dollars on constructing these palaces. In this reconstruction of Nebuchadnezzar's original 600-room palace, some of the original bricks from that palace were used, and they had praises of Saddam Hussein also marked on them. The bricks that went into reconstructing this castle, this palace, said, "In the era of Saddam Hussein, who rebuilt civilization in Babylon." That's what the bricks actually had written on them. Something that's interesting, that the Jewish people, we just celebrated. This year it fell on the secular New Year's Day. On the Jewish calendar, that was the 10th of Tavis. 10th of Tevis is a fast day. It's a fast day in the winter. Comes just after Hanukkah. We just had it 2 or 3 weeks ago. So the 10th of Tevis commemorates when Nebuchadnezzar laid siege to Jerusalem. And eventually that was the one of the starting points of Jerusalem's ultimate destruction. The 10th of Tevis was considered such a significant day in our history because it was the day that Nebuchadnezzar, his army, laid siege to Jerusalem, that it's observed to this day as a fast day. It's a day of sorrow. It's a day that we are mourning the destruction of Jerusalem. One of the things that is interesting is that when Saddam Hussein was found and executed, when was he hung? Saddam Hussein was hung on the 9th of Tevis, the eve of the fast. Saddam Hussein, the supposed reincarnation of Nebuchadnezzar, got his payback, so to speak, just on the eve of the fast. An interesting parallel that take it as you will. The Talmud, the Gemara in Yoma, says that the last hurdle that takes place before Mashiach comes involves Persia, ancient Persia, that's contemporary Iran, against Rome. Rome is defined as the major Christian superpower, which the Ben Ish Chai deems America. So there's a lot going on in the world, and it's not just at its superficial value that there's always conflict, there's always war, there's always stuff going on. That's true, there is always that stuff, but it hasn't quite existed in the way that it exists now, especially in the means of having it in a context of a global community with the players that are playing out this whole conflict. It's the same mess, the same conflict from ancient times. And we'll see what happens. But keep your eye on what's going on, because there's a lot more seemingly under the surface of what's going on than just this one doesn't like this one. There's a lot going on. So enough of gloom and doom. Let's talk about the good stuff that's going on. There is also, again, things are getting better. We learn in Koheles, in the book of Ecclesiastes, that God creates everything one opposite the other. Zel umatzah. So when we have negativity increasing in the world, you have to look to the other side as well, that there's just as much positivity also in the world. Again, negativity sells, and evil sells, and bad sells, and it's much more prevalent. But at the end of the day, there's a tremendous amount of good on the opposite side of the scale if we look to it. Another thing that a person has to consider is that, a lot of people get very down when they view the news, and who wouldn't? There's a lot of bad stuff in the news. But we have to remember that those are all sort of novelties, meaning that the rest of the world, everybody else, is acting more or less good. When we turn on the local news, like this one guy did this terrible thing to this person tonight, well, we have to remember that that's the novelty. All the other millions of people are more or less acting in a good way. Right? This novelty of this particular incident, this particular person doing something bad is like, we're surprised, we're shocked. That's why it's news, because it's something out of the norm. So we always have to kind of keep that in mind and not just look at it, in the here and the now, that this is what the world is like, that everybody is this terrible evil and it's a horrible place. In fact, if we could kind of assess our lives, imagine you can call up your great-grandmother or your great-great-grandmother on the phone. Imagine you could call them up right now. They're living in the time that they lived, let's say mid to late 1800s, and you're living right now, and you're talking to them in the future about what life is like now, as compared to what they went through, as compared to what their life was like. So you call your great-grandmother, or you call your great-grandfather, or your great-great-grandmother, your great-great-grandfather, and you tell them that we have this device in our kitchen. It's called a refrigerator. It keeps food cold, right? And we have this thing called a microwave that instantaneously heats food up. So you could always have preserved food for days and days and days, or much longer, put in the freezer, days and days, could be weeks and weeks and weeks. And we have this food, this other utensil that heats food up on the spot. Put something in the microwave, 30 seconds later, you have a hot meal. You can get food from all over, anytime. And there's enough food going around to feed the entire world. The only thing that stops everyone from eating these days is political strife or fear of different legal ramifications. But there's enough food being produced to feed everyone on planet Earth. People are scared of legal ramifications. Imagine a restaurant, leaves their food out for somebody, and they eat it, and they, get sick from it. Lawsuit on their hands. So instead, they have to throw it in the garbage. But the quantity of food is enough to feed everybody. We're producing enough food to feed the entire planet Earth. It's political strife or other legal concerns that stops people from eating. But it's an amazing concept. This is the first time in planet Earth's history that there's enough food being produced to feed everybody. We discussed how all the information of the world is, you tell great-grandma, all the world's information is accessible at our fingertips, anytime, anywhere. Our home is warm in the winter and cool in the summer. There's no Cossacks burning stuff down. Even Moscow helps build places of worship for the Jews. Alec, could you imagine telling your great-grandmother that? Never. People around teach their children of tolerance and love and peace. One of the prophecies that takes place when Mashiach comes is that they will beat their swords into plowshares, meaning that those things, those utensils, those items that were initially used for negativity will instead be used for positivity. Beat their swords, something of violence, will be used to turn into plowshare, something that cultivates, something that grows and helps. We see already the beginnings of that as well. First of all, that's the motto that's on the statue by the UN. There's a plaque that says they will beat their swords into plowshares, showing that that the ideology of the world is in theory to make peace. That we're getting to that ideology, that the world is framed in that mode. Radar, which was developed for detecting incoming bombs, is now used in commercial airline, right? The microwave oven is also a consequence of that technology. The space race was based on technology, in particular rockets, that was designed for nuclear warfare. But we see that it's on the other side of the coin. It's not used for that anymore. It's used primarily space race to investigate the wonders of the universe and to create new medicines and do all sorts of positive experiments. The Autobahn, the highway in Germany, was initially a means for German artillery to get across Europe. Now it's just a highway that enables people to get where they need to go in a quick way. GPS was initially developed under the U.S. Department of Defense for military navigational purposes, and now every car has a GPS that can get them where they want to go. So we see the concept of things that were created specifically for negative purposes, these swords, being beaten into plowshares, meaning transformed into positive uses. Ultimately, so the concept that I want to discuss a little bit now is a concept that will take place when Mashiach comes as well, the resurrection of the dead. It's a big concept. It's a concept that a lot of people have a difficult time wrapping their minds around. The average enlightened individual sees the idea of a bodily resurrection as a really fantastic belief that's set aside maybe for horror films or something that's only thought about by religious fundamentalists. Many people are very surprised to discover that the resurrection, the idea of bodily resurrection, is one of the main pillars on which the Jewish religion is founded upon. It's the 13th of the 13 principles of faith. Resurrection of the dead at some point in the Messianic future is very much a Jewish belief. To the point where the sages said that if a person denies the reality of the resurrection, that the body will resurrect at some point in the Messianic future, they have denied the entire Torah. That's a very strong statement. Furthermore, it says that one who rejects the belief is one who won't merit being a part of it, like a measure for measure. Oh, you didn't believe? Okay, have it your way. That's the Talmud says that, the Gemara in Sanhedrin. That's the measure for measure. So it's very much a central part of being a Jew, of Jewish belief. The Talmud relates that the idea of resurrection is alluded to in the text of the 5 books of Moses. And the books of the prophets as well have outright predictions of future resurrection. The book of Isaiah says in no uncertain terms that your dead will live, the corpses will rise, you who lie in the dust, awake and shout for joy. Yechezkel, the prophet Ezekiel, assures the people that then you shall know that I am the Lord when I open your graves and lead you out of your graves as my people. The prophet Daniel, an angel tells the prophet Daniel, many of those who lie in the dust of the ground will awake. So a fundamental point of Jewish tradition maintains that Jewish souls, every Jew who ever lived, and the righteous from among the nations will resurrect when Mashiach comes. At a certain point when Mashiach comes, every Jew and the righteous from among the nations as well will have a part in that, will come back, will live again. It's something that is repeated daily in our prayers, this concept. In fact, the Anaf Yosef in the Siddur Eitzer HaTfilos says that when we say Maida Ani every morning, thanking God for restoring our soul, it thanks God daily for sort of like a mini resurrection. They say that, when we go to sleep, that our neshama, our soul, for lack of a better term, leaves our body. That sleep is sort of 1/60th the experience of death. And then we wake up in the morning, it's like a mini resurrection. And so when we recall Maidani, thanking God for waking us up in the morning, that we're alive another day, it's a glimmer of the reminder of the future redemption. Every day in the Shemona Esrei, the Amidah, we bless God as He who resurrects the dead. It's a fundamental belief in our tradition, in our religion. In truth, initially it sounds like this fantastic idea. It's like this, well, how can a modern, sophisticated person, believe such an idea? But in truth, the future resurrection is not a difficult one to accept at all. Okay, let's take a step back. Right? It's already clear that God created the world something from nothing. Right? That's something that most Jews don't have a problem accepting. God made the world something out of nothing. He created somethingness out of complete nothingness. So why then would it be difficult for God, why would it be difficult for us to comprehend that God could create a second time from something that already exists? To create somethingness from somethingness, when He already created somethingness from absolute nothingness. If we examine the world carefully, one will find that there's really a glimmer of resurrection built into the workings of the entire natural world. The French philosopher Francois Voltaire said that it's no more surprising to be born twice than once. Everything in nature is resurrection. Think about a caterpillar. Caterpillar spins itself a cocoon. It remains inside until ostensibly it dies. Parts of it decay, becomes just a thick liquid. Eventually, this liquid blob becomes a beautiful butterfly with wings that burst from the cocoon and flies through the air. The entire appearance and the lifestyle and the eating habits of the butterfly are completely different than the caterpillar. It's like a completely different creature. Rabbi Israel Lifshitz, known as the Tiferes Yisrael, explains that one of the reasons that God created this creature and that it had to undergo this process of sort of dying and reemerging in a transformed state was to echo that which will take place during the resurrection of the dead. Yes, this metamorphic process. Yeah. Another example in nature of resurrection, so to speak, can also be seen just in the cycle of growing vegetation and trees. A planted seed, you plant a seed in the ground, only after it rots under the ground, only after some time does it start to sprout into a healthy tree with beautiful fruits and flowers, many times larger and greater than the original planted seed. But only after the seed is buried and it rots does it become this glorified, wondrous thing, this entity filled with fruits and flowers and all the things that trees have, is only after this burial experience. And so this idea, again, is ingrained in Jewish tradition that this echoes the resurrection of the dead. In fact, there is a custom. There is a custom in Jewish tradition that when a person leaves a cemetery, a Jewish cemetery, there's a custom of uprooting some grass, taking some grass and uprooting it. This idea is connected with a verse in Tehillim, a verse in the Psalms, from Psalm 103, which says that man's days are like grass. He blossoms like a flower. That's what the verse says. Man's days are like grass. He blossoms like a flower. So this indicates that just as grass seeds sprout after being buried in the earth, so too man will come forth alive from the grave as well. That's mentioned in the Be'er Heitiv in Yeridei and in the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law. So one of the commentaries explains that this plucking up of grass, the comparison of a human being to grass, is that a human being, just like a tree, just like a plant, grows only after it is buried into the ground, only comes to its fullest potential, only shows its most beautiful culmination, its pinnacle, is only after it's buried in the ground. This idea was actually used as an analogy by the Talmudic sages to describe to the ancient pagans the idea of resurrection. When the Egyptian queen Cleopatra had trouble fathoming the concept of an enhanced life back in the body after it decayed, Rabbi Meir, one of our sages, responded with the example of a wheat seed, which decomposes before sprouting new life. A related phenomenon about resurrection, or how we see resurrection, the concept existing all over the place, is that if you look at the forest in the winter, I remember, I grew up in Florida. I remember the first time I went to school, to rabbinical school, and to college, in rabbinical college in New Jersey, in the Northeast. So when I got there, that was like the first time that I experienced snow and winter. And so when you get there and you experience that for the first time, Florida is just life all the time. It's sunny most days, and even if it's raining, just wait 5 minutes and it will stop. But when you get to the Northeast, you can have 6 months of dreary, gray skies. Then it gets dark at 4 o'clock, and you look out into this vast forest, and you just see what looks like death. Meaning, trees, no leaves. It looks like a bitter wasteland. Little do we know, or little if you only knew, if you only saw that view, little do you know that right around the corner, come springtime, right, just a few months away, that forest will be transformed. It will be covered with lush foliage and filled with life of spring birds and animals. So if you only knew, when I looked at it, I was like, oh my gosh, what did I get myself into? I came in the winter. I came in January time. Oh my gosh, this is where I'm living now? This is what I'm... But you just don't take that at face value. Don't take the here and the now as the eternal end. Know that just around the corner, this place is going to be booming with life and beauty. In the modern era, it should not be difficult at all to grasp the idea that the body can resurrect. We know, it's known now, more than any time in history, that nothing can truly be created or destroyed. Nothing can ever be destroyed. It merely changes into a different form. In the late 1700s, it was discovered that matter can only change form and shape, but always retains its mass. Meaning you could burn it, pulverize it, do whatever you want to it. It can never be destroyed. You're just changing its form. Later on, it was discovered that energy is the same way. That energy can't be created or destroyed. It just can be changed. Its form can be changed. And then Einstein later proved that mass and energy are really just one and the same thing, two sides of the same coin. Nothing can be created or destroyed. So no matter how much something is pulverized, it's not gone forever. It's worth noting, by the way, that Judaism understood this concept centuries before it was realized in our secular societies. King Solomon said, "I know that whatever God does, it shall be forever, because nothing can be added to it or anything taken away." What God does is forever. Can't change that. Rav Sadia Gaon, 1,500 years ago, elaborates on this topic also. He says, even if an object is burned with fire, it can never be annihilated completely, because it's impossible to destroy something to the point that it becomes nothing. That is something reserved only for the Creator, who himself created something from nothing. We can never transform somethingness into absolute nothingness. We can change its form, we can grind it, we could burn it, we could do whatever we want to it. The existence, the matter, always stays. We can never fully nothing is ever destroyed. In our modern era, the idea of DNA makes the idea of resurrection intellectually acceptable and feasible to even the most ardent rationalist. The fact that every cell contains the information to reconstruct the entire body, and the scientific success in cloning a living creature from a living cell, shows that the idea of a bodily resurrection is not as far-fetched as was once thought. I recently had a conversation with somebody who said that, I had just met them, but they said, I was talking to my rabbi, and my rabbi told me that he believes that in this concept of Mashiach, that there's going to be this Messiah figure, and that eventually the dead are going to resurrect. I had the conversation literally last week. And he was like, he was kind of like shocked. And then he asked me, he's like, well, do you believe that too? I'm like, well, this kind of comes with the territory. And I said, what exactly do you find so hard to believe about that? He says, well, it just sounds like such a wacky, out of the box concept. But if we think about it in our own time, with the idea of DNA and the idea of cloning, the idea of remaking a body from already existing matter, it doesn't seem like such a far-fetched idea. It seems like something that even we can do in some ways. Like, I don't want to say that we don't need God, but if it's something that even we can do, it's a cinch for God. In 2009, there was a really interesting article in National Geographic magazine. There was a bunch of researchers who sought to bring back a variety of extinct animals, including a woolly mammoth. Could you imagine? Could you imagine? You know that in Siberia, there are literally millions of almost perfectly preserved woolly mammoths with flesh and all buried in the permafrost of the ice. So well intact were many of them that the meat had been eaten recently. People have eaten that meat because it was so preserved in the ice. I mean, I don't know if I would want to sample it, but right, exactly. But there were quite a number of people in relatively recent history that had actually eaten mammoth meat. Could you imagine? The animal's been extinct for several thousand years. So this group of people, so not only we don't just have cells or little traces, we have full mammoths at our disposal. We have all of the intact information that we need, that these researchers needed to create to resurrect the woolly mammoth. So in the article, again, this is from 2009. It was a National Geographic, very ubiquitous magazine, very well liked, whatever. So the discussion amongst these researchers was if it should be done. To almost create, I remember 20 years ago that there was Jurassic Park, right? So it's almost to create, with other extinct animals, like a Jurassic Park style park. A mammoth zoo. Could you imagine? This wacky idea. And so when these researchers were discussing it, they weren't really, the focus of the conversation wasn't whether it was possible or not to do. But it was just the ethical ramifications in doing so. Is it the right thing to do? Doing it wasn't this insurmountable thing. Doing it was almost a given. It was just ethically, is this the right thing? Should we not? So Tom Gilbert, who was an expert in ancient DNA at Copenhagen University, optimistically predicted, said something very interesting in the article. He says, if you can do it with a mammoth, you can do it with anything else that has passed, including your grandmother. That's what he said. So the idea of rebuilding the body from scratch, from nothing, basically, is not a far-fetched idea even for humans, even for us. So for God, cinch. Modern technology can sometimes be a tangible reminder of a neglected spiritual concept. The Chafetz Chaim gave an example of this. He said that when many people would falsely claim, when the tone of society was this false claim that God doesn't pay attention to what occurs in the world since he's so far away, well, around that time, that's when there was the inspiration to have this invention called a telescope, showing that even mankind has the possibility, the ability to view the heavens, despite the great distance from Earth. So when this spiritual concept, this spiritual void or doubt was present, was lacking, a technological advance that even humans can do it surfaced. When car GPS systems were first becoming popular, 10, 15 years ago, whatever it was, contemporary rabbis often used it as an analogy for God knowing where a person is at all times, right? Something that perhaps in our society is something that we don't always pay attention to. Well, God, is God really watching? Is he involved? Well, if we can do it, so just a little reminder, a little glimmer of what's going on upstairs, that God's also involved in watching and knows exactly where we are at every single moment. So likewise, this idea of cloning is not intended to minimize the future resurrection that will take place, which will take place in a miraculous way, but it merely shows that human beings can more or less recreate an entire organism. How much more, infinitely more so, can God do it? So I would say it makes more sense today, or it makes more rational sense that resurrection of the dead can take place nowadays than it would 500 years ago. I could understand if they had a quandary or if they had a question on the dead resurrecting, I could understand 500 years ago. But now even we have the ability, so to speak, to do it. So if anything, it makes more sense now than it ever did that such a thing could take place. Why a bodily resurrection? In Jewish tradition, body and soul are a team. They're a team that set out to accomplish a specific goal of uplifting the world, the physical world, through Torah and mitzvahs. The objective in Judaism is not to escape the world, but to live within the world, but sanctify it. Sanctify it through the observance of mitzvahs. And you need both body and soul to do that. You need body and soul. You can't do a mitzvah without a body, but you won't have the inspiration or the inclination to do the mitzvah without the soul. So you need both. The effect that charity has in the world, giving charity, the coin cannot be given without a physical hand. The kind word to another cannot be done without the physical mouth. It's a two-way street. You need a body and a soul. You need a body and an enlivening force. So being that that's the case, both get rewarded. Both experience reward, body and soul. It's kind of like, imagine there was a house on fire. And observing this house on fire, you have one man who's blind, and the other man who's a cripple. He's physically handicapped, can't walk. So the blind one feels the heat of the fire, but he can't see, and he can't rescue the people that are inside because he can't see. It'll endanger his life. And the other one, the guy in the wheelchair, he can see exactly what's going on, but he can't save everybody's life because he has these limitations. So what do? Well, the blind one puts the one in the wheelchair on his shoulders, and they go in and they save everyone in the house. Literally rescue everybody. So now the mayor comes. These guys are heroes. Job well done. Got to give the key to the city, but who do we give it to? And so they start arguing amongst them. Well, if you didn't have my eyes, says the guy in the wheelchair, if you didn't have my eyes, you would never be able to see where anybody is. And the blind one says, well, if you didn't have my legs, you wouldn't be able to see it. We wouldn't be able to help anybody. You wouldn't be able to drag anybody out. So the mayor says, okay, I'll reward both of you. You both get the key to the city. In a very similar way, this is the body and soul after its time on this earth. The soul wants its reward, and the soul deserves its reward for all the good things that it did. But what about the body? The soul would not be able to express itself, to do the physical mitzvahs, all of the positive things that we're meant to do in this world, without the means of a body. So both are rewarded. And that's why the ultimate reward when Mashiach comes entails body and soul. This is the majority opinion, that this is the ultimate bit of reward. That the ultimate reward encompasses both body and soul. So in the same way, in the future, God will judge body and soul together, either rewarding or correcting them both as one unit. In the Messianic future, when the dead will live once again, the entire world will have reached its pinnacle, and the true purpose of God's creation to bestow His goodness and handiwork will be experienced forever. That's what we're looking to. Just to conclude tonight's talk, we talked about the world history being on a cosmic clock, that we are nearing Shabbos, or Friday afternoon we're nearing Shabbos. As we discussed last week, it's a mitzvah to take in Shabbos early. No, not to wait till the last second, till the sun goes down over the horizon and wait till that last moment, but it's actually a mitzvah. We're actually supposed to add a bit of time, a little time of Shabbos observance to enhance, to bring holiness into the rest of the week. To make Friday, transform Friday, and Friday early, a little bit early, or a lot early, depending on how much you want to do, and make it Shabbos, accept Shabbos early, and let Shabbos go out late. So too, on the cosmic clock of our history, it's a mitzvah to accept Shabbos early. We don't want to wait. We're Friday afternoon. One of the things that we're told in our tradition is that Mashiach's coming is largely influenced by our deeds. The Rambam quotes the Talmud, and the Rebbe stressed the Rambam's idea many times that a person should always see themselves and the world as equally balanced, with good and evil, with mitzvahs and the opposite. And one more mitzvah that a person does is going to tip the scale and bring themselves personal redemption and bring the world to its ultimate redemption. And so being that our history, our culmination, Mashiach's coming is dependent, or is at least hastened, through our deeds, I want to encourage everyone to view themselves, starting this week, when they're conflicted in a situation. Should I do it? Do I want? If you're feeling lazy, should I put the extra effort? Is it? Should I push myself? I'm not interested. I'm not feeling good. I'm tired. Whatever. Push yourself a little extra hard. Think of yourself as that's the one more mitzvah, one more thing that we do could be the thing that tips the scales and brings redemption to the entire world. Have a wonderful week.